All right, welcome to part two. In here, we'll be first of all we'll start with talking about the understanding the patterns and determinants of demand. So, if we want to effectively manage capacity and demand, we need to go, well, what's actually determining, what's making the demand either higher or lower, and and how is our capacity affected by that? So, whether a service firm pursues a strategy of stretching capacity or a strategy of chasing demand, its managers must first understand the forces that are determining demand. And this is really important. Often people go, well, it gets busy at that point, but they don't really understand why. And if you can understand why, you can use those reasons, those determinants, to go, well, now that I understand, it's going to be easier to manage and I can shift these things, right? More variables to work with. They should identify the opportunities for smoothing peaks and valleys in demand. Now, managers may consider 4 questions in doing this. So first of all, do demand levels follow a predictable cycle? And sometimes they just seem like, we have no idea to predict when it's going to be busy or not. But when you actually map it out, there are predictable cycles. There might not be like here. I've got an example on the slides. Like it gets busier at this particular time of the day, right? So it might not be daily. At lunchtime, it gets busier. But an example is in the construction industry, we know that demand levels are going to increase when lending finance increases. So it's not so much about like a time thing with at that time of the day gets busy, or in this time of the year the construction industry gets busy, or every second year the year's busier. But we do know there's a predictable cycle. When people apply for home loans or building loans, that goes up. We know because people are getting money to buy things, they're going to be looking about that. So we can use these and inflation rates and all these other indicators that we use to predict demand within our industry. Now, what are the underlying causes of these cycle variations? So for something like a restaurant, it's obviously pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious why someone's going to want to go to a restaurant at 7 o'clock at night, right? Because that's when it's dinner time. But there's also these other things in different services that are causing these underlying ones. So coffee, why does it suddenly get busy just before 9 o'clock? Because people get the coffee on their way to work. But then why does it get busy all of a sudden at 11 o'clock? But that might be when people organise a meeting. It's a convenient time to organise a meeting at 11 o'clock, and where you're going to meet at the cafe, right? So if you don't know that, it wouldn't really... If you don't know that, you can't use that information to manage the capacity, demand, and predict it, right? And a lot of what we try and do in marketing is predicting what's going to happen in the future so we can manage it effectively. Do demand levels seem to change randomly? And sometimes it's completely unpredictable, but usually I'd say the people that say it's completely random aren't the people that are collecting the data and then analysing it properly. Can demand patterns be disaggregated by market segments? Some people, like we'll use the coffee for example, can you segment it by different things and go, well, these are regular commuters on the way to work, that's one segment, they get their coffee before work starts. Another segment that we have is business to business meetings where they go, like I said before, let's meet up for a coffee, let's meet at the cafe. Another segment might be mums, like they do the shopping with their kids or their babies and then they get a coffee on the way home. Like all these different segments, and can you predict? Sometimes it might seem random when you have it all together, but when you break it down into segments, you go, this segment peaks at that time, and that segment peaks at that time. When you overlay it all together, it's random, but when you disaggregate it and analyse each segment, you can see there's patterns for each segment, which is hidden in the totalness of the market, but the segments are predictable on their own. Right, so understanding the patterns and determinants of demand really comes down to a lot of marketing research and understanding, like data analysis. All right, so here we have a table 7.1 about questions about demand patterns and underlying causes. So when you get to this stage and you are trying to predict demand and it's hard, it seems random, let's have a look at this. So first of all, do demand levels follow a predictable cycle? If so, is the duration of the cycle a day? So it varies by hour, by week, by month, a year, such as seasons and stuff like that, or another period. So that kind of makes sense to me that you start at that level there. Now two, what are the underlying causes of these cycle variations? So once you work out a predictable cycle, what's causing it? Are the employment schedules? billing and tax payment fund recycles. We all know once we get a big tax return, we tend to splurge a little bit and buy. It turns out when people get their tax returns, they spend a lot of money on not fast moving consumer goods, in electrical goods, house products. So like dishwashers and TVs and stuff like that, right? So places like JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman and the Good Guys, they know that after, when the tax return comes, after tax year, there's usually a peak in those demand for those products. Wage and salary payment dates, if people get paid on a certain date, and this works for government payments as well. They pay on a certain day, so there's predictable spikes in demand relating to those payments. School hours and vacations, obviously a lot of touristy things are a lot busier in school holidays than during school time. Seasonal changes in climate. For some reason, a lot of people in Tassie want to go to Queensland in the middle of winter. At the same time, that they want to go to snow places when there's snow there as well, right? Occurrence of public holiday or religious holidays, such as Christmas and whatnot. Natural cycles such as coastal tides. Alright, so the next level is, do demand levels seem to change randomly? If so, could the underlying causes be? So if you can't predict it, could they be day-to-day changes in weather? Like as it gets hotter, the demand for ice creams increases. As it gets colder, the demand for, just say, I don't know, hot coffee increases, whatever it be. Like health events whose occurrence cannot be pinpointed exactly. And the example, this is like the sneezing, I'm trying to think of the name of it now, hay fever around spring, that's a health event, or asthma around smoke, like when they do the burn-offs, people with asthma. Accidents, fires, and certain criminal activities. Sometimes you can map demand for certain products with the level of crime rates that are going on in suburbs or cities. Natural disasters, such as earthquakes, storms, and whatnot. And this might not be a key thing to understand with consumer demand. It might not actually be the disasters happening themselves, but if they're expecting a volcano to erupt, if they start talking about it, people start thinking about it, and then the expectation or the perception that the risk is increased is going to drive demand as well. Another one is like the pandemic. So before we're actually directly influenced by the pandemic, and we all got, people got COVID and stuff like that. When the news was talking about it, people rushed out and buy, heaps of toilet paper and stuff like that. So it wasn't the actual natural disaster itself, but it was people anticipating or expecting it. So can demand for a particular service over time be disaggregated by market segments, such as use patterns by a particular type for a particular purpose? We talked about coffee shops in there. Variation in the net profitability of each completed transaction, which gets back to our customer value segmentation, and we're analysing how much it costs to service those customers and the profit we get from that, and we work out the profitability. So the amount it costs to service and the amount of revenue, I should have said, that we get from it, so it's going to be the profit. The difference is the profit, and then we analyse that per transaction for each segment. Alright, now strategies in managing demand. So when we have excess demand is higher than the maximum available capacity, so that potential business may be lost and customers have to be turned away. Now I'm going to jump forward a slide. I've got a little diagram here. On the next slide there's a bigger diagram, so I'm going to jump to that. Now when there's excess demand, here you can see the time cycle 1. So this is time along this axis here, and this is the level of demand on the y-axis, right? So here, low use, demand increases. So in this, when it goes green, it's above our maximum available capacity. And we call that demand exceeds capacity, and therefore business is lost. So these customers are either going to go, you know what, they can't serve me, I don't want to wait, I'm just going to go somewhere else. All right, I'm going to go backwards a slide now. Demand exceeds the optimal capacity level. No one is turned away because conditions are crowded and customers are likely to perceive deterioration in the quality of service. I'm going to go to this slide again. So in here we've got the maximum capacity, but here we have the optimum capacity. Remember I talked about the bus or the train with the seats? So when you're sitting, everyone's sitting down on the train, it's quite comfortable. But when you get over a certain amount of people, like when there's too many people standing up in the train, the level of service starts to deteriorate. And when the train is so crowded, it becomes unpleasant, right? So people go, I'm just going to catch an Uber or drive my car in or catch a bus instead of the train, or find alternative arrangements, right? Here, demand and supply are well balanced at the level of optimum capacity, and of course, as we want to be. Staff and facilities are well used without being overworked, and this is the spot to be in balance. So optimum capacity is that red line in there. It should really be the other way, where it's the green, because green is good, if you know what I mean. But that's what we're aiming for. Now, the last one, excess capacity. So demand is below optimum capacity, and productive resources are underused, resulting in low productivity. And this is the blue bit here, and that's when we're paying our staff, but they're not actually bringing in money. So our business is not running effectively. And usually what we do then is we try and get them to do other things. So if you're at a restaurant and it's not busy, you get them to clean the kitchen, or you get them to set the tables, or whatever you do. I don't manage a restaurant, so I don't really know. For the construction industry, when I was going to say boys, but that's politically incorrect. So when my staff aren't in the red spot there, so they don't have work to do, they'll be doing their paperwork, they'll catch up on their safety stuff, they'll be doing training, they'll be cleaning out the tool trailer, they'll be doing all these housekeeping jobs that you do when you don't have the next job's not ready for them to go to yet. Alright, so we manage it that way. Alright, so there's 5 basic approaches to managing demand. The first one is a dumb way, and that's to take no action and leave demand to find its own levels. It's dumb for us because we're learning how to do this. So by the time you graduate from this unit, I'll expect you to know how to manage capacity and demand. The people that take no action are usually the people that don't know what to do, or they just don't care, right? Usually it's about knowledge. So option 1 shouldn't really be available to you by the time you graduate. Number 2 is reduce demand in peak periods, right? So what's the best way to reduce demand? And that's to lift the price. So you've got to understand there is a price time lag. As you lift the price, demand is not going to respond immediately to it, and lifting the price is going to have impacts on your positioning. Remember, we talked about our positioning in the market. A lot of positioning is of our price relative to competitors. So if you lift our price higher than competitors, then that's going to impact our position. So you have to be careful about that too. All right, but there's other ways to reduce demand as well in peak periods. You could incentivize them to come in non-peak periods. So rather than lifting your price, you go make it cheaper when it's quieter. Increase demand when there's excess capacity, which is the one that I was just talking about. Inventory demand until capacity becomes available. Now, this is hard for some services, but for it's basically store like lines and stuff like that. So you're trying to store the demand, like inventorize, so like keep inventory of it. So basically store it until it becomes available. So most commonly that's a line. People just lining up for services. And number 5, create formalised wait and QE reservation systems, which link together with the 4th one. All right, so we have here, take no action, uncategorised queuing results, capacity is wasted. It's a bad way to go. Reduce demand, higher prices will increase profits, communication can encourage other time slots, which we talked about as well. Take no action, but see proceeding, which in there. So take no action is a dangerous one. All right, so we can to increase demand. Take no action unless opportunities exist to stimulate and give priority. That's when there's insufficient capacity, but we're trying to increase demand. So when there's excess capacity, we lower prices selectively, try not to cannibalize existing business so that one segment erode the other segments, and that ensure that all relevant costs are covered. Use communication and variation in products and distribution, and that's often why we have many different products categories in our product lines, because that's going to help us to manage our demand and capacity as well. So when one product there's too much demand, there's excess capacity for one product, then we could try and transfer and shift it through other product lines as well. Inventory demand by formalised queuing systems, and this is match appropriate queuing configuration services Consider priority system for most desirable segments. So we've done our customer value segmentation. We know who our platinum, our gold, and our silver, and our our bronze and lead customers are. Consider separate queues based on urgency and shorten customers' perception of waiting time, which we're going to talk about psychology of waiting. All right. So in there now, inventory demand by reservation system. So that's the queuing system. The reservation system is kind of like a queuing system, but it focuses on yield and reservation capacity for less price sensitive. So in here the queuing is where you just wait in line. Where the reservation system is like take a number, or we'll book you in next week Thursday or stuff like that, right? So consider a priority system for important segments, which is think about Virgin and Qantas. When you go to get on the aeroplane, everyone wants to board the aeroplane at the same time. I'm not sure why, but that's just what we do as human beings. We're going to be stuck on this aeroplane for the next 4 hours, but we sort of all seem to rush to get on there. So they go, well, if you're a premium customer, if you're first class, you can board first, right? Consider a priority system for important segments and make other customers shift to off-peak period. You can incentivise that. When there's excess capacity, clarify that capacity is available and let customers make reservations at the preferred time slot. So if you go, while it's busy, you're gonna have to wait 15 minutes, but when it's not busy, you don't have to wait at all. Obviously, customers, if they know that, then they're going to self-select into those less capacity, where there's they're going to help balance that capacity and demand, right? And that's going to be better for us. It's going to be better for them. And usually it comes down to knowledge. If you can teach your customers or inform them and make them aware of that. All right, now let's use marketing mix elements to shape demand patterns. So pricing strategies. One of the most direct ways of reducing excess demands at peak periods is to charge customers more money to use the service during those periods. And it makes so much sense, and we teach that in economics. We just have to be careful, because when we adjust our pricing, as I said before, it impacts our positioning, and there's a time lag, and there's menu costs. Menu costs are the costs of changing your prices. So it comes from the idea of a restaurant. If a restaurant wants to lift their prices because they're so busy, that's fine, but then they have to print all their menus again, right? Because the menus have got all the prices on there. So there's costs associated with changing price as well. Product variants, variations. When firms realise that no amount of price discounting is likely to develop business out of season, and new service products targeted at different segments is needed to encourage demand. All right. Now the next slide deals with the variation demand curves by time period, and we're looking at how it changes. So this is the basic economics, the supply and demand. So here we have the quantity, and here we have price. Now demand, so supply goes that way, demand goes that way. So these demand curves. So at time point 1 is peak hour, weekly, and high season. Now we're not adjusting the price, so we're not shifting along the demand curve. We're actually, so if we're adjusting the price, we'll be shifting along the curve. But this adjustment in demand is not because of price, it's from something else. So the actual demand curve is shifting itself, right? So that means at time 2, the peak hour, weekday, low season, so there's actually less demand. Here's peak hour, but weekend and high season. And then off peak hour, weekend, low season in there. So there's different demand for different times. Now, in here, the quantity of seats demanded, so different demand curves for different segments and 2 time periods, hypothetical for transportation service. So in here we've got the quantity of seats demanded, and here the price per seat. So the B is the business travellers, P is the pleasure travellers, and then we've got T1 for peak hour weekdays, high season, T3 for peak hour weekend, high season. So weekdays, weekend. Now BT1, so these are business in time period 1, so it's business in peak hour. It's a really steep demand curve, right? Now for pleasure travellers, at the same time period, it's a really flat demand period. Now we know about elasticity of demand. The reason why the business travellers have such a steep demand is because they have to board at that particular time to make their business meeting, right? So their propensity to pay for a particular product at a particular time is quite high. So if it's if the price is at this point here, they're going to pay for it. If the price goes up, they're still going to pay for it. So it's quite inelastic. It's quite tight, right? Because they need that seat to get on that. What was this? Transportation. So just say it's a bus or a plane or whatever it is. Doesn't really matter. They have to pay to get on the seat. Whereas a pleasure, it doesn't really matter. So this is like someone going on holidays or stuff or something like that. Stuff like that. It doesn't really matter so much because they don't have to be there at a certain time. They're on holidays. So they haven't got stuff booked in. So the demand curve is a lot flatter. So that's and then different periods. So in here for the P, so that's pleasure. Time period 3, which is the weekend high season, it's still quite flat, but it's going to be higher because it's the time period 3, which is the weekend high season. So it's just trying to relate to their demand, whether they're on holidays or going weekend travel, stuff like that. Now BT3, which is business, peak hour weekend 3, is going to be less demand, but it's still going to have that steep curve. So it's still inelastic. Alright, now using market mix elements to shape demand patterns, so modify the timing and location of delivery. So rather than seeking to modify demand for service that is continually offered at the same time in the same place, some firms respond to market needs by modifying the time and place of delivery, which makes sense. So time, place of delivery has got to do with our distribution strategies, right? Now communication efforts, marketing mix remains unchanged. Well, communication efforts really peak for promotion as part of the marketing mix, but the other elements remain untouched. Promotion and education through marketing communication alone may be able to help smooth demand. And I really encourage, like in my experience, a lot of demand can easily be smoothed out by customer learning and communicating with their customers. Because we want to, and the reason why I say that is because customers don't like waiting unless they have to. And we don't like customers waiting. And usually the reason why customers wait is because they're not sure, they don't know when it's busy, they don't know when it's quiet. So obviously communication plays a big part there. Now I have a hard time saying the word, inventorying demand through queuing and reservation. So where the possibilities for shaping demand and adjusting capacity have been exhausted, and yet supply and demand are still out of balance, customer-oriented firms try to develop strategies for ensuring order, predictability and fairness. Now demand can be inventory demand in one of two ways. So either by asking customers to wait in line, usually as a first come basis or first served basis, or by offering customers more advanced queuing systems, which we'll look at soon, or by offering the opportunity of reserving a booking space in advance. And obviously you can see the benefits of that. If you go, look, we're really busy